Welcome one and all to the ancient journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a share, and if you're into our content, please subscribe. It helps grow the channel and it keeps us producing these videos. Today's journey, the Sherman murders. I want you to study this picture. I want you to burn it into your mind. I want you to be sure to catch all the details. Everything you need to know about the end of this story is contained in this one picture. Do you have it? If you do, and you're ready, then let's start our journey. Barry Sherman was 10 years old and was brought to work by his father, Herbert, one day. His father was a zipper manufacturer and, like many people, brought his son to work with him so he could get some exposure to the real world. Herbert gave Sherman a box of zippers that needed to be counted and reboxed, and left for a short while to check on some other things in the factory. When he returned, he was amazed to see that Barry was already done, and Herman told him he did it quicker than his own employees would have. Herbert recounted the zippers, just to be sure that Barry was accurate, which Barry took as an insult. This was Barry's first exposure to business life, and it stuck. Barry would be on a path to be a manufacturing giant in his home country of Canada. Barry would go on to be an excellent student as well, winning national physics contests and attending college at the early age of 16. He attended the University of Toronto's Engineering Science program, a program he chose not because of how close to home it was, but because he felt it would be the hardest one to accomplish. During his summers, Barry would work for his uncle, Louis Lloyd Winter, who ran Empire Labs, Canada's at the time largest pharmaceutical company. When his uncle was away traveling, Barry would help watch over operations, and here, another moment that stuck with Barry, just like counting those zippers. Barry graduated from university with the highest honors in his class, and then went on to enroll at MIT to pursue his doctorate in engineering. In 1967, he completed his PhD in astrophysics. After completing his PhD, Barry set his aim with laser-like focus. In 1965, Uncle Lloyd, whose factory Barry used to watch over during the summers, had passed away. He and his wife Beverly died only 17 days apart and left 4 orphan children behind: Paul, Jeffrey, Carrie, and Dana. Barry saw an opportunity and purchased Uncle Lloyd's Empire Labs from the estate. Empire had been the first to manufacture Valium in Canada and also manufactured several other profitable drugs, including vibromycin, Oronase, and saccharin. The estate sold the company to Barry with a condition that the 4 orphan children be allowed to work for the company when they reached 21 years of age, and gave the children the option to purchase 5% ownership in the company 2 years after that by using any royalties that the company had earned on 4 of its patented products. The entire agreement between Sherman and the orphans would be voided if Sherman ever sold Empire Labs. In what would be the first of many of Barry's questionable and wicked business practices, Barry avoided the agreement for the orphans in 1969. Using a stock exchange, he sold the company to Barr Laboratories, who were Empire's largest customer. Then, in 1970, he invested heavily in Barr Labs and became its largest shareholder and its president. Barr went on to earn the rights to manufacture Prozac, another extremely profitable drug. In 1971, Barry would marry his wife Honey, who would become almost an alter ego for him. Where Barry was quiet and focused on business, Honey was outgoing and quite charitable. Where Barry was so cheap that his cars would often fail due to a lack of any maintenance at all, Honey would be the one to buy Barry a new car, although nothing too fancy, or Barry would have her return it. Barry and Honey would have 4 children: Jonathan, Lauren, Alexandra, and Kaylin. Together they would donate millions to charities, donate medicine to disaster zones, and personally help employees with financial problems. But Sherman wasn't all about charity. In a complicated scheme, Sherman would donate large sums of money from a company he controlled to one of the charitable foundations he and Honey ran. Under Canadian tax law, this would give Barry a tax credit against the money that was donated. The foundations would then be allowed to loan the money back to Barry, turning the foundations into Barry's private piggy bank. While Barry was president of Bar Labs, he was already working on a next questionable deal. He started up Apotex Labs with a few former employees of Empire Labs. Apotex was incorporated in 1974 and soon grew to be Canada's largest Canadian-owned pharmaceutical manufacturer. By 2016, Apotex employed over 10,000 people, sold over 260 products in 115 countries, and its revenues were about $1.5 billion annually. Apotex would make Barry Sherman the 12th richest Canadian, according to Forbes magazine. Barry's business life was full of lawsuits and questionable business dealings with many shady characters. Barry was proof positive that with enough money you could push anyone around, even the government of Canada. His 4 cousins, who he had screwed out of Empire, tried to sue him over his sale of the company, but were unsuccessful. Barry invested into a yacht chartering company, which turned out not to have any yachts. He bought a majority stake in a nutritional supplement company marketed by Kevin Trudeau. Trudeau's claims about the weight loss from these supplements landed him in prison for fraud. Barry simply moved his shares out from his own pocket into the ownership of Apotex's, protecting himself from the loss. Barry also partnered with Frank D'Angelo, a fruit juice maker. The two paired up to create energy drinks and various flavors of beer. When the company went bankrupt, Sherman put his son in charge of the company, but kept investing with D'Angelo. D'Angelo was trying to get into the filmmaking business, even while he was being charged with sexual assault and obstruction of justice. D'Angelo produced 8 films, all financed by Barry Sherman. Another fraudster that Barry would find to be a good business partner was named Sean Rutenberg. Rutenberg was a con man who would later be known to use different aliases to rob people of their money and their belongings. When you're the 12th richest man in Canada, how do you meet these business associates? Through a mutual friend who's also been to prison, of course. Myron Gottlieb was guilty of cooking the books of his company Livent and met Rutenberg in prison. Gottlieb defrauded his investors of millions, but Barry took his advice anyway and invested with his newfound friend Rutenberg to develop some sort of an online trivia game. Sherman later ended up suing Rutenberg, claiming that the con man had simply pocketed his money and produced nothing, the very sort of thing that happens to you when you invest with a con man. And perhaps the worst of Barry's shady dealings was the trials of their drug deferoprone, a treatment for a blood disorder in children. The drug trials took place at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, Canada. Dr. Nancy Oliveri, who would head up the study, had concerns about the safety of the drug. Despite her confidentiality agreement, she became a whistleblower and published her concerns. She was sued by Barry, removed from her position, and to make matters worse, the hospital took Barry's side in the matter, rather than risking the $20 million donation for a planned research center for the drug. Sherman had filed an estimated 1,200 lawsuits against the federal government as well. Apotex's lawsuits against Canada cost Canadian taxpayers millions of dollars, and some of the cases took up to 30 years to resolve. Barry was able to intimidate and bully the government due to his deep pockets, made deeper by the price gouging that he did on medications he sold. Barry also sued his way into a mostly free home when, upon completion of his $2.3 million home, he sued the contractors, calling the home a disaster and faulty. Barry and Honey filed 12 lawsuits against the contractors and would recover almost the entire cost of the home through judgments. With all of these lawsuits, shady dealings, and questionable characters around, it's no wonder that among a great many people, Barry was not a popular person. Morton Schulman, a member of the Ontario Parliament, said Sherman had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Other rival drug company executives used unprintable language to describe Sherman. Another drug company actually had considered planting drugs on him in order to get him arrested and out of the way. Ottawa law professor Amir Adaran said Sherman manipulated the Canadian laws to enrich himself and to impoverish Canadians. In 2017, the Shermans would put their $2.3 million home on Old Colony Road in North York up for sale. They were planning a move to Forest Hill, closer to downtown Toronto, where they would be closer to their inner circle of friends and business associates. They put their home, which they paid so little for, up for sale for $7 million. Purchased a corner lot in Forest Hill, and in true Barrie fashion immediately filed for 15 variances with the town to create their new estate, a 16,000 square foot home with swimming pool, car stacker, and servants' quarters. All the while, Sherman was still trying to screw his orphaned cousins, having just won back $300,000 in legal fees from them for their unsuccessful lawsuit against him from the Empire days. On December the 12th, Honey is a no-show for a meeting of one of her charity boards, which is unusual. The board reaches out to her by email, to which she responds that she is just busy dealing with, quote, some stuff. The next day, Barrie and Honey meet at Apotex headquarters before a planned vacation to Miami, Florida. Honey was set to leave the next day, and Barrie, always working, was to join her later in the week. Barrie sent an email out to his staff later that night about a new drug, but did not make any phone calls that night, which was unusual for him. Barrie was an insomniac. He did not show up at Apotex at all the day after that. Realtors arrived at their home on December 15th with clients to show. The cleaning staff had already arrived that morning, letting themselves in through a lockbox that was installed on the front door. The realtors showed their clients around the home, making their way from the first floor down to the lap pool and down to the hot tub. And there, seated on the deck, were Barrie and Honey, both strangled by leather belts tied to a metal railing above them. The two were fully clothed, facing away from the pool, with coats used to restrain their arms. Honey had a bruise on her face. Barrie was seated, with his legs crossed. The positions the bodies were in nearly matched the position of the two statues in the basement, the picture we started this whole journey with. The police investigation began, and the details of the deaths were quite unusual. Honey's cell phone was found in a bathroom, but according to friends, Honey never used it, so why was it out, and why was it left there? Barrie's gloves and some paperwork for the house were just left on the floor inside the garage door, but why? A window had been left open in a freshly painted room, and a basement door was left unlocked. Police found no signs of any forced entry. The post-mortem examination of the bodies shows that the cause of death was neck compression and not hanging, meaning that the strangulation was caused by binding or tying and not by the force being applied by the person's own body weight from hanging. On January the 26th, Toronto police advised the news media that Barrie and Honey had been killed in a targeted attack. They began to try to untangle the details of Barrie's life to make some more sense of it, but Barrie's business practices caught up with them. The search and seizure of any one of Barrie's business records proved difficult due to how litigious the Barrie's businesses were. Police obtained several search warrants and pursue several leads. The Sherman family offers a $10 million reward for information and hires a private investigator. 50 officers, 200 witnesses, and 2,000 hours of video surveillance make up the investigation. Police say they have a working theory of what happened, but in 2019, the private investigators working for the family close out their investigation. No suspects, no persons of interest, no one had been identified. But if you paid attention through this journey, you'll see that there are certainly plenty of people to choose from. While Barrie spent his life pushing around people, businesses, and governments exactly to where he wanted them, in the end, he was the one posed and left on display for the world to see. Thanks for watching, and thanks for sharing the journey.